Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to talk about the offense from that preseason Week 1 win over the Eagles, the 24th in a row for the Ravens. Here to do that with me is Jordan Coe of the Ravens Situation Room. How you doing, Jordan?
Good, Ken. Just happy to be celebrating this 24th win in a row.
Yeah, it's not nothing, but I would trade the entire streak for one injury-free preseason game. You too?
I think I'd trade the entire streak for maybe having to watch some of these preseason games altogether.
Oh, no. Okay, it's still good football. For me, I you're an analyst too, but when we get the opportunity to watch preseason football, it's like I understand a lot of people give their tickets away because the games don't mean anything, but they mean a lot in terms of player development, in terms of really understanding who the team is. So it's sort of like going to camp. It's like going to camp at night when there's a game on. It's like a real practice. Anyway, 24 in a row on offense. One of the things that kind of came out of this a little bit was did the Ravens make some compromises in this game to try and extend the streak? We talked a little bit about that on the defensive side. They certainly had some of their corners and Worley in particular at safety play a lot of the game, and actually Worley played the entire game. And Worley in the second half completely dominated it in terms of who he was on the field relative to everybody else. You could literally, we did this on the last show, a little bit of game of which of these ones is not like the other. And you have Worley, an 8th-year veteran with 55 career starts, and you had all these other first and second-year players. Basically, it just wasn't fair.
Well, it was interesting to see Huntley in the second half too, and then I was really surprised that it didn't pull Huntley after he came up a little bit with that hamstring, and maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked initially on that play, but and we'll talk in more detail about some of the performance, but for as poorly as Johnson played in the first half, not having Huntley available would be really particularly bad given the density of the Ravens schedule in the first quarter of the year. With a lot of these AFC North games, you can't, if something were to happen that he was out for the next 2 months in this game, that would have been really silly and was something that surprised me.
Definitely something we need to talk about is this backup QB battle. As much as everybody thinks Huntley is the obvious guy, and he certainly outplayed Johnson in this first game, there are a lot of factors in play here. And I kind of want to go through some of that with you. But the first is a fairly obvious one, and the Ravens need to be careful about all the time, which is cap space. And there is $1.5 million incentive to have Johnson be the guy over Huntley. Huntley makes 2.67 and Johnson makes 1.17.
I mean, that's a number. It's not very big. And in the scheme of how the salary cap works, creating $1.5 million in space in future years, and with cap growing, and essentially how you're almost always playing to the cap of the next year or the year after that, and not so much the cap in your current year. I don't see it as being nearly worth anything.
Okay, your argument though basically is that the cap dollars are worth nothing. They can always be deferred. Blah 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 blah. It's 0.6% of next year's cap, but it's even in fundraising, you realize dollars are real. Come on, I mean,
I'm not saying that they're not real. I'm just saying that with the way that if we were talking about $10 million in cap space, I would agree with you. But I'm saying that in any given year, in any cap space structure, challenge and issue that any team has, in the worst of scenarios, creating $1.5 million in cap space is going to have no long-term impact on any team.
Will it be the deciding factor in anything? Maybe not, but maybe it can keep you from making a bad deal, like overpaying for Roquan Smith in terms of draft capital you trade because you can't take his whole contract.
Again, I still just don't think $1.5 million is enough to move the needle for me. Okay. Now, even if it was 4, I'd be a little bit more there with you. But I just think that, we're talking about a veteran minimums equivalent salary anyway to begin with. This is the kind of thing that if somebody got hurt in a certain, earlier in the year that you were going to have to replace with a vet, you're just going to have to eat that. It just doesn't strike me as, I'm going to make my decision based on what I saw on the field there, and there's no way I'm taking this team, which I think is on its way to being, or could be on its way to being, a Super Bowl quality team. I'm going to let Johnson be the backup of that team.
Well,
that's just not happening.
Let me take the other side of it for just a moment and say that they already tried that last year with Huntley, and we all know if Jackson goes down, it's over anyway. I mean, the season is over. Huntley's not going to take him to a Super Bowl. Huntley might get him through 2 games in the middle of a season where they have a playoff anyway. But Jackson's season-ending injuries have been ones that have skewered the team each of the really last 3 years, but the last 2 years when he missed multiple games. From that perspective, at least, I think you'd have to agree that it doesn't matter who your backup quarterback is, whether it's Johnson or Huntley. If it's a season-ending injury for Lamar, that is the reason either of them are playing.
The root of your argument I'd agree with, but I would say that it seemed like it was in the realm of possibility that and you and I witnessed this in person, and we're both equally heartbroken. Yep. If he doesn't make that boneheaded decision to try and jump over the pile when it wasn't the call, there's a shot that Lamar comes back last year, right? There's no scenario that I see Johnson or Brown keeping the Ravens in the game in the way Huntley kept them in that Bengals game. A, and B, I think Greg Roman not being here is the factor, and I think we'll talk about this more when we talk about this game. I watched this game, and it almost felt like the Ravens were trying to toy with my emotions, because they were like, we're going to make this look, we're just going to do the exact same thing in this preseason game that we've done the last 4 years. It's going to be pulls, it's going to be counters, it's going to be bunch tight, or it's going to be completely empty and spread out wide. It's going to be mesh plays. Everything that we saw them run in this game is everything we've seen for the last 3 or 4 years.
Let's come back to that in a moment, because I don't agree, but let's come back to that. Let's come back to that in a moment after we get through the quarterback thing. So aside, I really just talking about point of entry, and honestly, I just want for a discussion point the money component. 1.5 million would not make the difference for me either. But since I believe that the season is lost if either of them is there, I think it's really the 1.5 million actually would weigh more heavily for me than it clearly would for you. But let's talk about other things. The opponent is an issue. So the Ravens were facing the Philadelphia Eagles. They played Jordan Davis. They had Nolan Smith on the field to start the game. They had some dangerous young pass rushers on the field who could have hurt a quarterback. Is it possible they waited to put in Tyler Huntley because they really wanted to take very little injury risk with him, and they thought there was less of a chance later in the game?
Sure, and you could make the same argument for Gus Edwards. Like, why? Like at the decision point to insert Gus Edwards when they did in this game really surprised, I think, everybody. And your line of reasoning would be the closest line of reasoning, I think, to why they would do something like that. I also thought Gus ran with very little intensity and very little risk, which is not who he is typically as a player. And so I do think that injuries are more on this team's mind in the preseason, but I just think in general. I mean, we've heard how they changed their practices. We've heard how that they're trying to identify what those things are. It does seem like injuries, like none of the top tier guys, even the young ones, we're seeing any of that time. So maybe, I think there's something to that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that would be another possibility. One of the other things I have to remind people relative to these two quarterbacks is if somebody ever brings up the argument, but wait a minute, Josh Johnson is 37. And Tyler Huntley is 20, whatever the hell he is. I don't know. I actually don't know. 27, maybe. I don't care either, honestly, because the difference in age between those two players is not really relevant. You have players that are if they're 10 years apart in age, it's still 1 year and UFA for both of them. So there's no future option the Ravens hold on either player unless they're going to franchise one of them, which ain't happening. So we're talking about it's the only question that needs to be answered is this player a better quarterback for 2023? And one of the things that has been happening in camp is Josh Johnson is getting a lot of snaps, and that I don't think it's absolutely determined in the Ravens' mind that Huntley is the guy over Johnson at this point.
I'd be shocked.
Right.
I feel like it's almost as near of a lock that like Tyler Huntley is as much of a lock for this Ravens roster to me as anybody.
Give me the analogous player.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I'm trying to think.
Malik Harrison, I might agree. If you're,
No, I'm not. If the Ravens cut Malik Harrison, I wouldn't be upset at all. Let me think about that a little bit. I'll come back to it.
Sure. Yeah, it is a hard analogy you had to make, and I'm not trying to put you in a corner.
No.
It's
a good question. It was a great question.
All right. So we talked about money. We talked about the opponent. We talked about tenure. Anyway, the one thing I think was certainly not part of the decision is winning the game. And that's been brought up by people. Well, they put in Huntley second because they want to preserve their chance of winning. I think they did do some levelization of talent at other positions, particularly on defense, to try and make that happen. But I don't see it at all. I think the Geno Stone move last year to win that first preseason game was let's pick the balanced two pairing of safeties where we have a good free safety for both halves kind of thing, rather than play our best two safeties in the first half kind of thing. And so they moved Jefferson up into the first half, and then they cut him. And then they put Stone in the second half, and he was the best player on the field. Kind of reminds me of Earl Weaver, balancing his lineups in a doubleheader and being very effective at that. Anyway, I don't think that trying to win the game had anything to do with it. There probably is some subconscious bent. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, that says, we really want to try and win this game, and they know how to do it, and they have good personnel to do it generally. I just don't, and Harbaugh probably sees a value in maintaining a winning culture even during the preseason. But I don't think it would come ahead of almost any other decision in the game. The only thing I think they do is, I don't think they do as much testing of one-on-one individual talent as other teams do in a preseason game.
I completely agree with the latter part of your statement. It's very clear which is why we'll get more into what we saw from the offense, but why I feel like it was just vanilla and generic and the same as usual. And so maybe that's just me lumping Greg Roman into vanilla and the same as usual. But they don't attack those matchups in that way. So it does make it does kind of beg that question. I do think they might change strategy a little bit here and there over some things that they might do in an effort to win the game. Make it, and go for two decisions, like being a little bit more aggressive to win in some of those situations. All those little things, I think those definitely bend into the strategy to win.
Okay, so all of those rules apply to every team. Is you always go for two, you never go for the tie. You go for the touchdown on 4th and goal, probably from the 5-yard line if you're down 3. You might go from the 10-yard line if you're down 3. But you don't ever play for the tie in preseason. And it's something that that's built into every team's risk management techniques, is not to play an extra half quarter of football if they don't have to. But as far as the thing, I think that where it may show up more is Harbaugh knows how to get a game over. The Ravens have been very good in recent years at getting games over with, and they don't feel the need to evaluate players throughout 4 quarters the way some other teams do. So a lot of teams, people want to see, let's see if Johnny over here can run a good slant route against a cornerback who we think is kind of quick. Well, the Ravens say, what do we need to know that for? We see that in practice. Why do we need a one-on-one, revisitation of that on the field here when we, can test that in a lab just as well ourselves in practice?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
I agree. The Ravens have. It's bizarre to me that for as bland and as generic and non-targeted their preseason approach is, that they have won this many games in a row. It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, we went over this on the defensive pod, but every single defensive snap was either base or nickel. Every single one. So they had 2 outside linebackers on the field, 2 inside linebackers on the field. And given those 2 starts, there's only so many ways you can allocate the 7 defensive backs and linemen, and it was always 4-3 or 5-2. So there were no variations on the basic scheme there. What else do we need to talk about? Let's talk about the deployment order other than quarterback. So a few things interesting going on here. I always like to talk about the offensive line first because it's so structured. You have 5 positions. They're on every play. There's no we'll just play with 3 this play. You've got to play with 5 and basically exactly 5. So I think it gives you more. The Ravens never really change it up by series, or at least they haven't this year so far. So let's just talk about how that went in this game. We had, first of all, the Ravens sat out their 5 top linemen in the game. And that includes McCary, and it does not include the 2 starting left guards, but it obviously includes Ronnie Stanley, Morgan Moses, Linderbaum, and Zeitler. And that is a lot of offensive line talent to sit out even for 2 series in a preseason game.
Sure is. I mean, the Ravens just decided that they didn't need it. It wasn't worth the risk, which I'm glad for it. It made it, I think it makes for a less entertaining product on television, but you know what? Like you were saying earlier, we would gladly trade this win streak or a lot of other things for an injury of any substance to any player that's going to make an impact this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, they have a limited number, of course, of padded practices every year. And the first 2 padded practices, I believe Ronnie Stanley has missed both. So with vet days. Well, does Ronnie Stanley ever need a padded practice? I don't know. Is he going to play the next 2 days against Washington? I guess he'll play at least one. Would be my guess, and then he'll play in the he might or might not play any in the game on Sunday. Might be a limited number of snaps, limited number of reps in practice here against Washington. But they're clearly taking. He is one of the players that not only is he good, but the backup is bad, and so and it's obviously in a critical position. They're not taking chances with him.
Yeah, the downhill cascade, especially, when you look at all 4 of those premium positions, like especially because left guard is in flux, it almost makes every single one of those other spots important, because it's like you've already kind of, if McCary is the card that you want to play, and you feel like that's the thing that you've got to do at left guard, you can't afford to do it anywhere else and then have an issue with left guard still be one that needs to be resolved.
Right. So
you just got to keep everybody intact.
Right. And for that reason, I don't think we're going to see McCary at left guard at any point. I think he'll go in at left tackle. And if they had a problem at right tackle, I don't even know how they'd address it. But based on what we saw in the first game, we'll talk about him a little later. I think Daniel Faalele has clearly made strides since last year. He played all the snaps in this game. We'll talk a little bit about his grading, but I thought that he's a player who really benefited from the fact that they were bubble wrapping the other tackles.
Well, that's what you want, right? When you have the depth to be able to, and when you draft guys like Daniel Faalele, that's what you want. You want to give him the opportunities. He's not going to be polished, so you don't need to bubble wrap him. He's not a guy that is his development long-term matters more than probably anything. And so it's good that he was able to get those snaps in and get that playing time in.
Yeah, it certainly was. And the guy they took extra care with, which was kind of a weird one, was Sharp. Sharp started the game at left tackle, played 2 series. Then he left for the rest of the half, and Faalele moved over to left tackle. Then he came back for the first series of the second half, which was not an insignificant number of plays. That was a fairly long drive. And then they moved back Faalele there for most of the rest of the game. Not quite all of it, because Tykeem Das came in at the end for a couple of series. But it was an interesting kind of switcheroo. And one thing it kind of told me was they really value Sharp probably as a backup more than I would have guessed. Like he might be. It's really hard to put this in line, because it's clearly going to be McCary is going to be the first guy up at left tackle if something would happen. But I'm guessing Sharp is the next guy that they really trust, which means they really trust him more than Faalele, or they would have played him more than Faalele.
that or he's a bubble guy, and they're trying to limit the amount of looks that other teams are going to get at him.
Not a bad argument. I mean, if he's really a bubble guy, you might want to trade him. In which case, if you're going to cut him,
but you might want him on the practice squad. If he's a guy that's good enough that if you had to call him up, he's the first guy you'd call up. And we want to give Faalele extra reps and extra work anyway. Let's not put something on tape where someone sees it and says, "Hey, that guy's Sharp. We got to have him."
Valid point. Valid point. I wouldn't argue with that. I think that's a reasonable point. And left tackle is such a shallow size and shape pool in the entire NFL that it degrades quickly. It often is the conditional 7th round pick for a left tackle that's gone out the window. Now it's a conditional 6 everybody wants, or it's a 6 and a conditional 7, or it's a oddball set of picks people tend to want. That's much more than you'd think. So a player like Sharp, all that has to happen is about 6 to 8 weeks of NFL game day injuries to roll off. And all of a sudden, left tackle depth around the league is going to be a little bit less. There's going to be some right tackles who've already gotten hurt right tackles who've gotten hurt are not necessarily the same barn, but there's going to be left tackles who get hurt and the right tackles have to move to replace them, and all the stuff that happens to make it easier to think that David Sharp might have a job, at least as a backup, somewhere else around the league.
Exactly. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how that iteration on tackle plays itself out here.
Yeah. So what else did we see about this? Let's talk about Simpson and Saleh a little bit. So Simpson was in first, started the game. Now, this has been a weird thing. I'm sure you've been kind of following it at least, but Harbaugh announced in advance that they were going to switch to let Simpson be with the number ones in practice. It seems now, after starting with Saleh in OTAs, continuing with Saleh through the big part of camp, that they almost had this figured out that Simpson was going to be the starter, perhaps even for opening day, or at least they thought it was a higher percentage chance, that they gave Saleh as much time to try and prove himself as they could before the last moment where they had to switch over to Simpson now, still have him play in this first preseason game. And we're going to get to this a little later, but Simpson very significantly outperformed Saleh in this game. Very significantly. I'll talk a little bit about how I scored it, but any way you look at it, no matter how you treat that one penalty, which was pretty damn damning, it was still a pretty significant difference in their level of play. Then Simpson, is in position now, being with the ones, they might just not change back. So it's kind of like having your chance second is better in this particular case, as long as you know it's planned for this to occur.
When's the last time the Ravens had a guy drafted as late as Saleh end up being a starter from day one on the offensive line?
No, I don't think it's ever happened. I
don't think so.
Yeah, Rick Wagner would have been maybe the closest, and he didn't start right away.
No,
I'm trying to think. I don't think any offensive lineman drafted real late. Have they ever had an UDFA start at any point? Because McCary came in and he was.
Going way back, wasn't Flynn a UDFA, or was he a late pick? And how soon did he play?
Yeah, that's a real good question. He might have been a UDFA, and then I'd have to look to see.
But he might not have even played in his first year.
Mike Flynn, right? Okay.
Yeah, Mike Flynn.
Mike Flynn played only 3 games in '98, and played at Maine, and I do not believe he was drafted. So I think you're right. But 3 games in 1988, then 12 games the next year. Then he became. He didn't actually start games until 2000. So
there you go.
In 98 and 99, he was a non-starter, but he played some. So it sounds like in 99 he might have been in. I don't know if they used a lot of 6th offensive linemen, so I don't really know how he got into 12 games though. Oh no. What that would be is he's probably playing special teams in some role in those games and not offense. So,
but either way, the Ravens really trust pedigree when it comes to starting offensive linemen in terms of draft. Ben Grubbs, Stanley, some of these higher level, or are guys that got, speaking of what a bombshell there. Speaking of, they prioritize that pedigree, and it's pretty rare. I mean, we have definitely seen some guys get in over time as starters. I guess Kelechi Osemele started at left guard, but he was a second round
pick, yeah.
Yeah, so still not as late as Saleh. So my guess is that, Saleh would have to really, really, really impress, I think, the Ravens brass in a lot of ways to win that job.
So Gradkowski might have started right away at center as a 4th round pick, I think. That didn't work out. Yeah. Yanda in 2007 played some, and then he was hurt at the beginning of 2008, and somehow Yanda was having a really hard time cracking back into the lineup. They had a great offensive line, but Chris Chester was the guy holding him out. And, he left for Washington, had a great career, but but it's pretty freaking incredible that Marshall Yanda has to sit on the bench for anybody. But they drafted Ben Grubbs #1 the previous year, Yanda in the 3rd round, and he was still sitting on the bench, partway into 2008. Yeah.
So yeah, he's got to earn a spot, and and we can talk more specifically about some of the players, but I agree with you. I think Simpson is now pulling himself away here a bit from at least what we saw in this first game.
Right. I would agree with that. By the way, how about this Michael Orr saga? It's funny that it's like the play within a play almost, because the movie was about the Tuohys bringing him in so they would be alumni boosters to Ole Miss, and they would direct him there and blah, 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 blah. Little did they know their evil scheme was something completely different. My guess is, though, the Tuohys didn't have this planned. If anything, the Tuohys probably were closer to the Ole Miss recruiting scam.
Yeah, who? Yeah. I mean, who knows what part of what is involved with all of that? But it's wild that it took this long for it to come to light. That's the part that surprises me, that a story like that could be held under wraps for such a long time. But maybe Michael needs the money now, and that makes all the difference in the world about what you're willing to share.
Yep. That could well be the case. Now, Michael Orr made a lot of money playing the game, so I hope he didn't blow it all yet, but you never know. So it does happen. People make bad investments. People make bad wagers sometimes. And, could be a lot of things, but
not me.
Yes, there you go. I know how you're you know exactly what you're doing. All right, so. Let's talk a little bit more about other offensive linemen in terms of when they got in the ball game here. And I need to get back to my little chart here. Mustipher playing most of the game at center. Obviously, the Ravens didn't have a lot in terms of backup center options. They ended up with Thomas in the game. He had a big holding penalty later, but Mustipher played quite a lot of this game, 3 quarters.
Well, and it's definitely the Ravens. It's funny, when we were talking about Huntley, and I went back and looked through the depth chart to try and identify a similar guide to him. The real challenge is that this Ravens team does not have a whole lot of depth, really, at any position. That kind of, like, maybe not the first guy off the bench, but the second and third guy off the bench, the drop off at almost every position looks, at least right now, pre-development, before the season's getting started. We haven't seen the scheme. We haven't seen how guys fit. Except for wide receiver, which is what bizarro world are we living in, that the Ravens' deepest position is wide receiver. Outside of wide receiver, it feels like the drop-off is pretty quick. All that, jumping back to Mustipher, is to say, having a guy that can log meaningful center snaps that you could trust, again, with Makari being that X factor that you don't want to have to play that card until you absolutely have to, was good to see.
Yeah. So anyway, hopefully... one thing I did not watch from this game was Mustipher's snaps, and it's something I need to make sure I do, because that's a big component of his ability to be successful is drilling that ball on time. But I didn't take the time to look at it in this particular game.
I didn't notice any outstanding bad snaps, but that doesn't mean that there weren't any.
Yeah, it's about trajectory and velocity, and those are the two things. And how often does a quarterback have to reach down for the football? How often does he have to reach left or right? And then how is the ball, like, arcing to the quarterback? Is it, and that obviously plays into dropping off the table and going to the quarterback's knees. But if it's arcing, it's also going slower. So you can actually time, since you can time to 0.003 seconds, there might even be like a difference in the number of clicks that would be judgeable. Like, it might be 1 to 2 clicks quicker if you had a long snapper type shotgun snap that was right on the belly button every time. But anyway, it'd be something interesting to look at and compare. Maybe a couple different centers in that regard. I haven't done it, but I think it'd be fun. How about Ben Cleveland and his treatment in this game? So right guard, right tackle, back to right guard, back to right tackle, and then retired after, well, basically the first drive of the fourth quarter.
Look, if you know what's going on with Ben Cleveland, you either work in the Ravens front office or you need to tell me the next time the Powerball gets to $1 billion what the numbers are going to be, because it doesn't seem to make any logical sense. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to what they're trying to accomplish with that. It seems like he's not at all a factor at left guard, and so that probably means he's the front runner to play left guard.
That would be funny because they did that with Powers
Right.
last preseason, but it was fairly obvious what they're doing with Powers because they only left him in at right guard for like 1 or 2 series and then took him out of there. So with Powers, it looks like they're really experimenting, kind of like they are with Falele a little bit, in that they're trying to see if he can play right tackle. By the way, Ben Cleveland was one of my highest rated guards back when he came out. So it's not just Harbaugh who was wrong about him. If the Ravens truly are wrong about him, he doesn't become a good lineman. It's me and Harbaugh and a bunch of other people who liked him. But one of the things I said is, if the Ravens have big problems at right tackle, why isn't Ben Cleveland under consideration for that? And remember, then it was Alejandro Villanueva had to be moved to left tackle, and the Ravens really had.
Film Study is brought to you by Factor. With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for those jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. Then get back to crushing your goals. Refresh your healthy habits without missing a beat. And with Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in all of our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door and ready in just 2 minutes. No prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/Ravens50 and use code Ravens50 to get that 50% off. That's code Ravens50 at factormeals.com/Ravens50 to get 50% off. Film Study is brought to you by GoPuff. GoPuff is a delivery app that offers super fast delivery of anything you need. Their simple-to-use app lets you order your favorite brands and products right to your door in 30 minutes or less. No middleman, no crazy fees, and no waiting around. GoPuff has literally everything you could ever want. Get snacks, drinks, groceries, alcohol, home essentials, and more delivered with a click of a button. For a limited time only, GoPuff is giving new customers $10 off their first 10 orders, plus a free 14-day trial of their exclusive membership program by using the code WELCOME1010. GoPuff's membership program gets you access to unlimited free deliveries with no service fees, extremely low pricing on over 150 everyday essentials like eggs, milk, Ben & Jerry's, and more, and insane weekly deals on the most coveted and in-demand brands and products. So download the GoPuff app or visit gopuff.com and use the code WELCOME1010 today.
Nothing at right tackle. And McCary played some time there, but even McCary got hurt in that season and missed some time. So they had Tyree Phillips over there, and he's awful. Just a bunch of different crappy options. You have a guy with some arm length. You do have a guy with obviously some lumbering feet, but why is now the time you try him at right tackle instead of, back when your hour of greatest need was here, and you literally lose a season to terrible tackle play. It's hard to fit the pieces together. So I'm a little shocked by that, because Cleveland has enough length to get by over that. He has longer arms than Michael Orr did, not quite the 34-inch length that I would like over there, but he does have some. He has issues obviously with his feet. I'm not saying it would be perfect, but it's something. If you have a power run game, he can certifiably help you with that. So even if he hurts you in some other ways. So anyway, it was just interesting to me that.
I mean, obviously he's fighting for a roster spot at this point. Mm-hmm. That he may be, you're thinking about how, Sharp played less and Cleveland played more. It tells you that the Ravens need to see something from Ben Cleveland, or he is not going to be on this roster on opening day. And for a guy drafted at the level that they drafted him, for him to be in that position for this team, the Ravens seem pretty committed often to their guys out of the draft for, enough time to let them develop. This one would surprise me a bit.
It would frankly shock me if they cut him. I think they might trade him. That's a possibility. And there might be a team out there that really wants a massive human being like Cleveland. And maybe they're even trying to groom him for a trade by having him play right tackle and not look bad there during the preseason. That's certainly kind of what they did with Tyree Phillips in his fourth year, but Cleveland's in year 3. There's still sand left in the hourglass. There's time for that sand to turn to gold instead of sand. And, I think there's a chance that they really still hope he could be of value to this team this year. And to me, I think he's secured himself a roster spot as of now, just because the depth is not particularly good overall. Okay, let's take a player that he might be in direct competition with for the last offensive line roster spot is Mustipher. So Mustipher is a backup center only. He's a short arm guy, but he's a big, powerful guy. He represents a difference stylistically in what the Ravens can put out there at the center position. And maybe they can even get more out of him. They should be able to, than how he played in Chicago, which was not all that well. So there's that going on. They've had Cleveland in-house in their own laboratory, and they haven't been able to get very much out of him, obviously, for 2 years so far. But I still think that if you compare those two players and you say, I got Ben Cleveland plus for one more year, I got Mustipher for this year only, who do I want? It's pretty clear to me you're going to try and keep Cleveland, and you're going to take your chances with Mustipher on the practice squad, elevate him as needed. If somebody else takes him, oh darn. But you'll go to the rest of the league's pool of available centers, and it's a much deeper pool than there are of potentially right tackles, but also just enormous guards as well.
Well, and that's where your point about a trade matters, right? Like if you can extract some value here out of Cleveland and you don't think he's ever going to get there, then take the value you can get now, live with it, be happy with it, and, move on.
Yeah. Well, they might do that. They clearly might. All right. Let's see. Anybody else in the offensive line we need to talk about before we move on here? The one guy was Manning, got a pretty long look. And he's a pure backup guy. I mean, but he played 28 snaps. He wasn't terrible. Looks to me like he might be earning a practice squad spot with that kind of play. They might also keep another tackle there like Tykeem Das. But Manning, Tashawn Manning was not utterly terrible. Thomas had the holding penalty. Gideon looked bad. There's just not a. Of the threes, I think Manning might have a pretty good chance to make the practice squad.
Yeah, but I mean, your assessment there was about how it looked. I mean, and that's the nice part about playing down. So obviously there was that one really bad rep that Ben Cleveland had against Carter, and everybody saw it, and it was all over. It was all over everywhere, and you could see it. And you get that when you have disparity between player quality talent. At least when you're seeing guys get beat in these preseason games that are the 2s and the 3s for the other teams too. It does help secure your evaluation internally as a team to say, hey, yeah, it's not there. Let's go with the guys that it does look like it's there for.
Right. I mean, in the case of Cleveland, that's obviously Jalen Carter on the other side of the field who got the quarterback hit. It's just a general problem I have with offensive line play. Don't judge hitters by the length of their longest homer. It's actual work to evaluate offensive line talent. You have to look at every rep. I don't believe in trait-based scouting, not in any kind of real way. I mean, I do believe in a sense I'd like to see and I'd like to corroborate with scoring, but I want to corroborate with scoring no matter what, basically. I want to have some systematic method of evaluating people because offensive linemen get 1,000 at-bats a year, to do this. It's not like you have limited control groups you're working with. Take advantage of that. Look at the data, look at what you've got here and try and make reasonable evaluations that way rather than going with, oh, look at this rep, it was terrible. Kind of thing. And I see that so much online, it really just pisses me off. So it just
does it? Does that bother you, Ken?
Yeah, it just bothers me a little bit. It's just I'm not even going to go into this any further.
I was just teasing again.
I got it. So let's talk about the other positions in some of the deployment order. Obviously, Zay Flowers got a very brief trial early at wide receiver. I thought it was kind of cool that they didn't end up getting him a target. My prediction was one target he would get during the game, and they actually threw the ball to him twice, and once on a backward pass as well. Draws 2 penalties. That is a beautiful thing.
He was wide open on the play where Johnson stepped out of bounds on the right side, and these announcers needed their warm up for the preseason too. He was running wide open to the other side of the end zone. He was at the 3rd mark, and there was nobody within 8 yards of him, and Johnson could have just lofted it up as high as he could have and thrown it to that back corner, and he could have run it down.
That was on a roll right?
It was on a roll right.
Okay, and he was running towards the left side of the field. There's almost a 0% chance. Yeah,
but it wasn't like he wasn't at the goalpost yet. He was still in the third. He was still in the third to the roll side. He was just at that point breaking back away from the play, and he was. If you go back and watch, he was wide open. But anyway, I thought Flowers looked fantastic. I thought that they obviously wanted to get him a few game touches, so he had the feeling of kind of what that was to get it out of the way. Don't tell me that orbit play that they ran on the not forward pass was not a Greg Roman staple. The Ravens have run that play 100 times in the last 3 years.
Oh, let's put it on tape and see what the advanced scouts have to say about it in week 1. This is one of the things. I mean, you're right. They did do orbit plays. The other side of that, I'll say, we can talk about this now if you want, in terms of the offensive scheme looking the same as it did. The big offensive scheme that was completely missing was a fullback. They didn't use a fullback at any point until very late in the game. So, as long as they're running out of 11, I mean, Monken has put a stamp on this team. They had a lead to protect, and they weren't even going back to the fullback early in that 4th quarter.
I'll definitely give you that. I think just the staple of the design, and it was intentional. And I'm like, again, I think A is a little trolly. B, it's protecting your scheme. If Monken wants to do something different, obviously Lamar, the starters aren't playing. Why give up anything that you want to do in the 1st quarter of the season in a game? Why put that on film in a game with players that may not even be on the team, right? So I certainly understand all that, and then you go back to your core, and guys know those plays and all that kind of stuff. But it gave me a little bit of PTSD.
You are a very negative Roman guy, and it's going to be many years and many drinks until I can get you to admit that Roman was the best offensive coordinator in team history. Oh, your screen is freezing over there.
I don't know that I would disagree with that. I don't think I would disagree. It would take one drink, maybe. It would take a drink. I'm not gonna admit to it sober, but I mean, he had the best season ever of a Ravens offense, so that is undeniable. He just couldn't adjust. He wasn't certainly going to be around for a long period of time. And the Ravens didn't need to put anything on tape in this game. But it was good to see Flowers in them trying to move him around a little bit, just give him a feel. All this is to say that they were trying to give him a feel for what the game was going to be. And he looked every bit the part in the live game that we're hearing that he was in practice. And I think that's what's significant, which is that sometimes with these guys, you hear how amazing they are in practice. Ardarius Washington is another guy where you always hear all these great things about him in practice, and you even see it in these preseason games. And the regular season starts and he disappears.
Well, Ardarius Washington's been absent at practice, not absence in terms of being injured, but he hasn't been, getting first team reps at all. And they've had all these other slot corners ahead of him. And now we see, wait a minute, we had this guy all along and he's playing this well. But the guys who've gotten snaps ahead of him are Brandon Stevens at slot corner to start camp. And they finally, I hope, have got him back in the proper place, and they're going to keep him there because the Ravens' need is so great there. It's even greater than the need at slot corner, where their need is truly enormous also. But they have an even greater need for depth on the outside corner. And Stevens actually fits the bill better in terms of the physical tools to play on the outside as well. But they moved him out of there. Then they signed that Arthur Mollett guy, and he's, of course, been hurt and missed time. And now he gets a chance. Pepe came back off his injury, gets injured again. And now he's going to miss time. I hear a month. Harbaugh says a month. I hear a season.
Yeah, I mean, they're saying at least October or October at the earliest. Yeah. So I mean, that's half the season.
Right. Yeah, if he comes back, it'll be sometime post London. I'm sure that he'd be coming back if he does it all, and it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't come back at all. In a way, it wouldn't be terrible, but they have to play the game of trying to sneak him on the roster, use one of their 8 returns. Now, the 8 returns is not a serious limiting factor. What is a significant limiting factor, a possible limiting factor, is how many additional guys they can get on the margin of the roster by having handshake deals, and how many of them they're actually comfortable paying for because of the likelihood that they'll return. So, you may not, the 1.5 million difference for the quarterback difference, you may be willing to pay that, but are you really willing to pay a guy 1 million to be on your roster when he has to return, and B, then he has to beat out whoever you got left at that point. I do think the Ravens would be well served to have a couple of potential returners on their in their hip pocket, in their 54th to 58th men that they take into the end of the season.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And against Kyle Hamilton's ability to play in the slot when he's actually playing, the ability to do that if you have to.
Yeah, but right? That's the thing. Are we going to set ourselves up to be forced to do that?
Just and the broader, I was trying to give it in the context of who and how guys were playing, where they were getting their reps, where we were letting them see some of them play. Mm-hmm. Maybe some of them are a little out of position in the context of this game because a different iteration of personnel that is available to the Ravens never allows that to happen. So hopefully I am in agreement with you. Hopefully Brandon Stephens is not the guy getting slot reps at any point of the season. I thought he held up well enough on the outside last year. It wasn't great. It wasn't, I'd call it average.
He improved as the year went on. So that you got that to go on.
And even if you wanted to call it slightly below average, in today's NFL, you can live with that. Honestly, you're people are going to attack even good corners and find success. And so, I mean, that's why the Ravens shifted some of this mentality of what they want to do on offense. And so if that's the case, then hopefully we'll see some of these guys be put in the right position to be successful. And I think you and I have talked about this. If not you and I, Gabe and I have talked about this, about Stephens being a guy that some people think that the Ravens have kind of not given him a chance to fully develop by moving him around between 3 different positions. I'm not in that school of thought, but if that's what you believe, he's certainly a prime example.
Yeah, it's the issue is it's the quality of player that determines if you can do that or not. And great players, you can move them around. Yanda, Adelis Thomas, Jarrett Johnson, Ed Reed moved from strong safety to free safety. Not that big a difference. Obviously, it's certainly not that big a difference if you're Ed Reed. Marshall Yanda, you can put him anywhere on the line. He got hurt. He played left guard because his right shoulder was still good and he could protect the inside on that side. If you're a great player, you can do it. It's if you're kind of a marginal talent, it has less of a chance to work for multiple reasons. So Michael Orr is not going to be good at that kind of thing because he's kind of a marginal NFL talent to start with. And Brandon Stephens, we don't know yet, but he seems like he's kind of marginal. Kamalai Correa, marginal talent. It just doesn't work for those guys anyway.
Yep.
I've said that enough time on the show that the people who've heard it already probably almost know it by heart. I apologize for that, folks, but every once in a while. Let's see. What else do we want to talk about? The team is remarkably shorthanded at tight end for how deep they are at tight end.
You think? I disagree. Yeah. I think tight end is probably tight end and wide receiver are the 2 positions where I'm comfortable with the Ravens depth.
No, I'm sorry. Let me be clear about that. They're completely fine for the regular season, which is why they're only carry 4, which is why they're very shorthanded in preseason because you don't want to play any of your top 3 guys. So it's a meandering argument. I guess I shouldn't have expected you to get it all at once there, but it is a case where Kolar is a guy. I guess Kolar really needs reps at this point. So it's not a terrible thing for him to be on the field, but likely you don't want him in for very long in a game like this. He's part of your offense.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kolar looked a little slow in this game, but I thought Volacek, is that right? I thought he looked really good.
Vokalek.
He
did. He looked good.
I almost had it. I thought and that's where it's kind of hard to say. I mean, that's 4, he's not going to make the roster, or it would take some unsightly things happening between now and opening
Yeah,
day.
any injury to a tight
Yeah.
end, that's what it would take.
And even then, it wouldn't necessarily be a lock, I don't think.
I think he'd be the guy. He's looked pretty good, by the way. I think one of the things that has been true in camp is he gets a ton of targets, and part of the thing is he plays with the second and third team units always. And when he's out there, the second and third team quarterbacks like a big target. If you're Anthony Brown, if you're Josh Johnson, whoever you are, you like throwing to a big target when you're down on an extended play, we'll call it. So he ends up getting quite a few targets. In fact, he's been the target on a lot of really good defensive plays in camp, interestingly enough. But it is what it is. And he had a very nice catch over the top in this game.
He did. So. Yeah. So, I think with Ricard likely being on the roster to begin with, even a Kolar or a likely injury might block Vokalek from, did I get it right? Vokalek from getting a roster spot.
Yeah, that's possible. Okay, so you're saying if Ricard is on the roster, then you really have three tight ends because you're not going to use a fullback. And now Ricard becomes your pure inline guy. You've got two flex guys, and boy, isn't life good again. One of the things I really want to talk about was Ricard at guard in this game, because Ricard moved to guard, a little bit of practice, playing with the threes, did not do much in the padded practice last week. He wasn't on the field at guard that I noticed in 11 on 11s. I might have missed something. He might have been out there for a few reps, but I didn't notice it. What is really interesting about the Ricard situation is that I think what the Ravens are trying to do to extract additional game day roster value by having him be the eighth offensive lineman, because, hey, look, Ricard's a guard right on our roster right here. And then they actually get a free fullback without having to roster one. And you got two inactive offensive linemen. And it almost never happens that you have to go to your eighth offensive lineman in an actual game. And if they do, they'll take the chance with Ricard when it comes up.
Yeah, if you're on your eighth offensive lineman in a game, you're already on thin ice to begin with. Yep. So it's the same analysis in this idea of, does Huntley even matter? If it can't take you to where you need to get to. But if you've got three starting, the Ravens have if three of Stanley, Moses, Linderbaum, and Zeitler are down, I'm going to be watching between my fingers.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Let's keep talking here. One of the things I thought was good about this game was there were quite a few forced tackles and missed tackles in space. Speed looked very good for the Ravens, and we didn't see a lot of Devin Duvernay in this game. By the way, he had one target. It was the catch for a touchdown. Nice play, no problem. Good throw, right on target. Duvernay turned at the right time, made the catch. Just everything about that was just exactly as you draw it up in terms of how that ball is thrown. Same thing to Wallace on the back shoulder throw for the other touchdown, by the way. But what really strikes me about this is we saw a lot of Keaton Mitchell in this game. And we saw some of Flowers, enough to get very excited by. And boy, you think an offense that can create space, I'm not bothered at all. Hill, also, another guy. I'm not bothered at all by having 3 or 4 guys who could be used for gadget plays on this offense. In fact, I love the idea.
I am totally with it. The speed, Mitchell speed, Melvin Gordon should be calling his agent, because I think it's pretty, unless Dobbins isn't ready or something else happens injury wise, I'll be surprised if he's on the opening day roster based on play, but just the Ravens can't afford to lose Mitchell. John Harbaugh has got his checklist about running backs, and if they don't check those boxes, they don't like them. And so I hope Mitchell is checking whatever those not things that we see on the field. Tyson Williams never checked whatever those boxes are. whatever
Mostert and Smoke Mizell are 2 others they lost, and those guys ended up playing pretty well other places. And I've liked the way the Ravens I like the way the Ravens used to be able to find running backs off the scrap heap. Now it seemed like they're really taking the biggest, shiniest objects off the top of the scrap heap, which are the discarded 29 and 30-year-old running backs, and they've been terrible moves for the Ravens these last couple of years.
Really bad moves in that regard. I agree. So hopefully Mitchell makes the roster. The speed that you saw from him, I thought was fantastic. I will say the clear focus on back shoulder fades and some of these outside comeback routes, which by the end of the game, Ricks had figured out that that's all the Ravens were doing. And that's why he got anybody that wants to write about how good Ricks played just needs to understand that he was doing what anybody does in Madden and realized exactly what somebody was doing on the other side and was just sitting on it. That being said, there was a clear emphasis on the Ravens' part there. That has not been as big of a staple. We haven't seen some of those kind of comeback routes be a huge part of the offense since kind of the Anquan Bolden, Derek Mason era.
Well, what it really means is the Joe Flacco era, because you need the guy with the Nolan Ryan like arm. Bill James had a comment about this once: can throw a snowball through a blast furnace without getting it soggy. and it's in Flacco's case, the one thing he does have over Jackson is undeniably a laser of an arm in terms of the medium distance throws and how quickly they get there. It's something they've really missed, and also with Flacco, they had good accuracy on those throws as well. So they had good route runners with players like Mason and Bolden, who would come back for that ball and do a great job with it.
But you could see the clear quality of throw difference between a guy like Huntley and Johnson on those routes in particular. And then Brown as well. Brown does not have the arm strength for it at all. But Lamar Jackson is known. Lamar Jackson's arm strength, I think, is a bit underrated. His throwing mechanics are a bit unorthodox, and it doesn't look clean and tight like when Flacco would do it. But whenever you see, I think ESPN just put out their top 10 lists of like traits, and Jackson was like 8th or 9th in terms of arm strength in the league. He can sling it down the field as good as anybody, which means that he's got some power behind his arm. I thought it was interesting. For as much as I was trying to talk about the Greg Roman offense showing up, those back shoulder throws in the end zone and those comeback routes were not something that we have traditionally seen the Ravens try and attack. And so if that is a point of emphasis moving forward, that's a different development for this offense, and especially for defenses that have been clumping towards the middle of the field. Typically, you see everybody basically always playing with inside leverage, always playing to the middle of the field, always pushing everything to the middle of the field and trying to clog it there. And so perhaps this might be an early answer or focus for the Ravens to be able to do that. It was really nice to see that from Duvernay and Wallace.
It kind of goes against some of who Lamar Jackson is to throw that route. For one thing, it's a very timed up and scheduled throw. And then you take away Jackson's value from being able to move around and make a throw play off schedule, which is what we love him for. And to make him try and become that guy who can throw it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it'd be a wonderful thing to add to his arsenal. I'm just saying that in terms of who he is, it does kind of minimize other Jackson value to have him throwing a quick 15-yard out to the sidelines to try and get 8 or 9 yards.
Lamar Jackson has also been notoriously terrible at out routes. I think that some of the worst interceptions of his career have been on out routes in particular. I'm remembering the Cleveland game where I think he threw 3 of them, and every time they were telegraphed, they were floated. It was just out routes. I would hopefully we don't see a lot of those. Either way, that would be one area where I'll be interested to see when week 1 rolls around, especially in the red zone, whether or not that's an additional part. I can't remember a back shoulder front side throw for the Ravens in the red zone last year. Certainly
think about that.
Certainly none that was certainly not 2 in the same game that both resulted in touchdowns. So, and again, these aren't Lamar Jackson, and maybe maybe it was also just something the Ravens went into this game and they said, we're going to work on back shoulder fade throws.
Fades, basically are corner routes to the back of the end zone. So we're being clear with people who maybe don't know all the terminology that are thrown in a hierarchy thing, a very low probability throw for anyone. And that really takes away from Jackson, because Jackson's value in the red zone, and the reason he had no interceptions for that longest period of time, that's been broken a number of times since, is his ability to scramble side to side and find a direct line to the receiver is what made him so valuable in there. So I think that's the reason why it doesn't exist as much in the offense. It's a matter of who Lamar is, and it's just going to be easier for him to he's going to be able to, a higher percentage of the time, find that guy while he's also a threat to run. The defense has to be looking at him, and then somebody gets lost in the end zone, all of a sudden he's got a line drive he can throw. All right, let's move on. Anyway, I was very positive about the number of missed tackles in this game. Zay had 1. Gordon had 1 on his reception. There were just a number of fine plays. The reversal of field was nice. Good to see that. That hasn't been something the Ravens have done all the time. I don't think they've told their running backs don't reverse your field, but we had a good run by Keaton on a reversed field and a good run by Hill, obviously for 37 yards on a reversed field. Just nice to see that.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say that didn't look great was the screen game. I don't know. Mm-hmm. The Ravens screen game when Ray Rice was around was fantastic. And then something happened when Ray Rice was done with the Ravens. And they, at that point forward, I can't remember a season where the Ravens have been an effective screen team in any capacity at all whatsoever. This game, their delays and the screens were, and this might be a byproduct of the backups being in, but they were horrendous. They were horrendous this game.
Yeah, the throw that went to Mitchell was a really bad throw. It was behind him, but you could see if you just freeze the point at the point where the ball is going over the shoulder that's behind him and he's having to reach back for it. Okay, is it a catch he should make 4 times out of 10? Probably. But it's not a catch certainly he's going to make every time. You hope he does. And they had 3 blockers out front slavering for somebody to block, somebody to flatten. It was a very well blocked up play there, and it would have been a big gain if Mitchell had been able to get it, because you also have Mitchell's escapability.
Well, wasn't it like 3rd and 30?
That was the play, wasn't it? It was 3rd and very long, so it should succeed, you would figure.
Right, but the larger point being that guys didn't have anybody to block yet because they were 25 yards farther down the field still, preventing the first down. But either way, there was a tight end screen that was really bad. The Ravens just have never
receiver screen left. Treadwell didn't pick up the block. That was awful.
They don't seem synced up on the line. If there are receivers that need to be blocked, the deception and it's there, the timing's not there. It's a thing that the team definitely could use, I think. So anyway.
All right. Jordan, is always outstanding to talk football with you. Some great discussion in the first half of the show. We're going to come back, take a little break, and we'll be back for the second half of the show. That'll be posted separately, so please look for that and download that as well. Jordan, tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
Yeah, you guys can find us on Twitter at Raven Sit Room. We've also got a podcast on filmstudybaltimore.com with Ken. We're going to try and be doing a couple things this year, a quick reaction to games with me and my co-host Gabe Ferguson. He's at Gabe Fergie. We just kind of get a little bit of the emotion of the game out on Sunday night, but get it on tape, and then try to do something a little bit more later in the week that's a look at some of the key plays that happened during the game, but a look forward at how we think those might make a difference in the upcoming game the following week.
Our outstanding follows on Twitter. They're on this show all the time. There are a couple of guys I know who are always available, always love to talk football, and they probably each do 3 shows a year. In terms of the offensive or defensive review, so you'll be hearing them a fair amount again this year, I'm sure. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, hit me up with a DM on Twitter. Always looking for that great kernel of a new idea, just some topic we can discuss for 15 to 25 minutes is even ideal. A lot of people want to solve the Manhattan Project on this kind of thing. Really think about a shorter project than that if you can. Some little part of it. And I'll talk to you about it. We could break it into 3 shows or something. But the evolution of the game was something somebody came to me with, and we had to break that into 4 shows. But that was great. It was a lot of fun to do that. And I'm happy to have that discussion with folks. But just remember, we are trying. I'm searching for content that might be about 20 minutes long, because a lot of these shows end up being an hour. And even though I love talking football, I know that some people will end up listening to this on 1.3 because I shouldn't even suggest that on air because these shows go a long time. But anyway, Jordan, really appreciate having you on.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
We'll talk to you next time on Film Study.